It's May. The lottery is less than 2 weeks away, which means it's draft time. And what a better way to kick off draft coverage here at Locked On Pacers than talking about the prize of the draft, Mr. Victor Wembanyama. Adam Spinella from the Box and One's going to join us to talk about the French prospect, one of the best prospects maybe in NBA history. We'll explain why and more on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, draft coverage begins here on Locked On Pacers, talking about the story of the draft, the presumptive number one overall pick, one of the best prospects of my lifetime in the NBA, Victor Wembanyama, the French center for Metropolitans 92, who has been just making waves. The NBA streaming his games on their app all over the place. He is because he's that good. We'll break down why today. Adam Spinella from the Box and One, who you should subscribe. Best way to get draft content right through email inbox. I absolutely love it. Is going to join us to talk about what makes him such a great prospect, where his small pitfalls are, but in general, why he's so amazing, and a little bit about his fit with the Pacers. At the end, it's a great show. Adam's insight is much appreciated. His basketball background is fantastic. We'll get to it all today. Let's jump right in. It's time to dig into the prospects one by one. And speaking of one, there is a one in this draft, and calling it this draft is unfair. There is a one of the last 20 years, maybe, at the top of this 2023 NBA draft, and it's Victor Wembanyama. We're going to dig into all of it today. Joining me to do it from the Box and One, it's Adam Spinella, who all the time, the Box and One sends me emails about prospects. I believe Derek Lively was the most recent. They're so good. The direct-to-consumer model for scouting prospects was needed, and it's fantastic. Adam, thank you for doing that. How are you?
Tony, it's always good to be here chatting with you. An old friend, feels like a reunion show whenever we get together, but fun topic tonight because this, like you said, is a generational talent at the top of a fairly good draft class. And I think everybody wants to know, who is this kid? What is he about? And I'm here to tell you he's the real deal.
Well, that's, I guess, big picture, because people know who NBA players are. Like, I've seen AD, I've seen Odin, which injuries changed that one. I've seen LeBron. Like, would you say best prospect since who? Is LeBron your answer? I think that's the most common one.
Yeah, LeBron would be my answer. And it's hard for me to give that full context because, I'm 31 years old. Like, I was in middle school when LeBron came out. I've only been doing the scouting stuff at really full scale for about 6 years, but it's pretty clear in watching the tape back. Like, there's no other prospect who has had this amount of hype and lived up to it during the year leading into their draft.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And, you could see the highlights of him like blocking 3 shots in a row and then running in transition and dunking. But just when you flip on his games, whether it's in the French league or in Euro League or whatever he's playing in, and he's playing Euro Cup as like a 16-year-old, but it's like, that people joke a lot with Giannis because he's 7 feet tall and muscular, that he just like looks bigger than everybody else. But I was just showing a screenshot of they're doing player introductions of Wemby to my girlfriend. I was like, tell me which one's the NBA prospect. Like, he looks like a giant with kids playing on the floor because he's so big. It's insane. And so much of what he does is just like, oh, I'm 7'3" or 4 or whatever, and I'm better than you. But I think everything starts for me with him being an amazing prospect with his defense. Like, the way he can defend every pick and roll, every type of action, basically any player on the floor. And for people who don't know, though, he's playing and has a lot of current, former, whatever NBA players in it. Like, I think the game I was just watching was like Mike James, Monty Eunice, all these guys, and he's just better than everybody and can contain all of them in every way. I mean, it's ridiculous how good he is.
He's so damn good on the defensive end of the floor, and it doesn't just stick to the physical tools that he brings to the table. I think he's got a really high basketball IQ, knows where to stand, how to move, that playing at different angles is the hardest thing for a bigger guy to kind of learn on the defensive end of the floor. He's already so good at it. I think of defensive impact being somewhere between challenging shots and deterring shots from being taken when we're trying to evaluate big men who protect the rim and are standing in the lane a bunch. So if we're going to view Victor Wembanyama first and foremost for his rim protection, he's 7'4" with an almost 8-foot wingspan. And you can see through the progression of the season how opposing guards, when they come off of ball screens and they see him standing back closer to the hoop, they are afraid to challenge him. They don't want to go all the way to the basket when he's in drop. And when he's closer to the level of the screen, they don't want to take pull-up jumpers because his length and just how quick he is off the floor to be able to contest those pull-ups, he gets his hand on or at least alters the shot trajectory of everybody who tries to score over the top of him. It's absurd.
2 or 3 times, a guard would come around his screen, have nothing, and just throw it off his leg. Like, get the kickball. Let's start over. This is not worth it because you can't do anything. He's so big. Like, teams put the biggest guy on the inbounder sometimes for this exact reason. Like, there's just nowhere for the guard to throw it, and there's 2 guys on him. It's just like the pick and roll's dead, and it hasn't even really started because he's so big and in your way. And you mentioned the contest. Like, his wingspan's crazy, and his vert's pretty good. It's not, like, insane, but it's pretty good. So, like, he can jump from 10 feet away from you and stick his arm up, and all of a sudden your shot has to go higher than normal. And it's like, what do you do? You have to run actions really far away from him. And a lot of teams can't even do that. If they don't have a shooter, he's just roaming under the basket the whole time. Like, the defense is so ridiculous that, like, saying normal things about it, like he can defend pick and rolls and like he can be the roamer under the baskets, like that's not right. Like, it's more than that. And I get that the NBA will be bigger people and maybe he'll look a little weak his first year, but just the way he's able to stop anything is unlike basically any prospect I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I try to evaluate it in terms of scheme versatility, right? How is an NBA team going to play him? Do they want him dropped back closer to the basket, almost like Rudy Gobert, where his size, his length just eats up a ton of space? I think that's a valuable way to play Victor Wembanyama because he is so big, so long, and has good instincts of knowing when to jump. You want to play him closer to the level of the screen where he's maybe a little bit more aggressive and trying to get the ball out of some ball handlers' hands. He can do that too because he's always really good with angles. He's patient, stays low and in a good position, and then can contest those shots at the very end. And I even think there's some switchability with him where because he moves his feet so gracefully for a guy of his size and he has the length to contest from behind if somebody takes him a little bit off the bounce and gets a half step of an advantage, he's going to be okay guarding in space as well. So the scheme versatility, it's not just the dominance near the basket and his ability to protect the rim. He can do it in so many different ways that he's the holy grail of a defensive prospect.
It does help that around the basket he swallows up everything. Well, I think he's at over 3.1 blocks per game in the French Pro League this season, which is like a fake number. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, you nailed a lot of the other stuff too that was impressive. Like, I put his foot speed in my notes, and he has that. Embiid had this. I talk about this with bigs sometimes when it clicks. Where like there are these bigs who run like a gazelle, and I just feel like that always is a good indicator of your like fluidity and athleticism and ability. And you can see it with Wemby, even when he's just like stride for stride staying with the ball handler on a switch. So yeah, I don't think he's like super fast, but I think he's so fluid and quick enough that, yeah, he'll be a good switch defender because of his length.
And one thing I want to add to that, whether it's the Pacers or another team out there, whoever's fortunate enough to get Victor Wembanyama in this draft, they should make sure that they bring along his conditioning and personal training team because they have done an unbelievable job with injury prevention work, of maintaining his flexibility, his fluidity and movement patterns at somebody his size. Like, they clearly have his trust and they're doing things a little bit outside of the box. A lot of times you see a tall, skinny guy and the idea is throw him into the weight room and lock him in there until he adds muscle to his frame. And now he can hold up against the biggest, strongest guys in the NBA. I think there's something a little bit antiquated about the simplicity of that statement. Functional strength is always going to be important at any level of sports, but he's such a unique build with his frame that he's got to be handled with care, and flexibility is going to be just as important as physicality. So I think that any team that takes Victor Wembanyama has to be aware, like, he's probably going to be skinny for a couple of years, but keep developing him in the right patient way off of the court, and he's going to stay healthy and be able to just be a dominant basketball player. At the end of the day, that's what you want, dominant basketball players.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. How much time do you spend on yourself in a week versus someone else? How do you balance the two, pouring into others versus pouring into yourself? It's easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. Many have benefited from therapy, and it can be helpful for learning positive coping skills or setting boundaries or empowering you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just those who have experienced major trauma. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Yeah, I forget what the Malika Andrews was on the start of this call. It was one of the NBA broadcasts of one of his games, and they talked a lot about his strength and conditioning team and how they've helped him get to this point from when he was whatever years old. And they were like, "Oh my God, this guy's what's he doing?" The only big negative thing for me with his defense is there's a lot of his closeouts where like he takes a step and he just jumps, right? Like he's not very good at staying down, and I get that habit when you just block everything for your whole life. Watching Isaiah Jackson with the Pacers for years, he has this problem too. He'll definitely have to get better at closeouts and chopping his feet and not flying by guys, because that's where he's given up or made his team give up some easy ones so far. But that's the only thing I saw that I was like, I have to include this defensive negative in here.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just being aware that a guy who has his length and long, just a different frame, like his stride length is going to be incredibly, incredibly long. So
Yeah.
it's a unique movement pattern. If he comes out of his stance at all and tries to alter shots, he's going to be at a disadvantage trying to recover. It just takes him longer to do so with his frame. So I think you live with that in some regard because he's going to be so impactful on the perimeter. He's blocked enough perimeter jumpers that you want him within an arm's length of somebody to be able to block that. But you do have to kind of live with some of the bad stuff that comes with somebody of his frame.
So offensively, there is this whole like other side of the ball.
There is.
That he'll have to play. The funniest thing about watching him play offense is Metropolitans would bring him into this screen and he'd come up and set it. And the defensive team in 2 of the 3 games I watched, 4 defenders defending this pick and roll. 1 guy to tag him, 1 guy under the basket, and 2 to the ball so they can't just flip it to Wembanyama right away, because that was the best way to slow that team down. Is anyone else, any other player on this team, don't come barreling down the lane at us at full speed, who's 7'4". And that wasn't every time, but it was a lot of the time. And there are certainly, I think, more flaws in his offensive game than defensive game right now. But because he can put it on the floor a little bit and create for himself, because his pick and roll game, he's got to be a better screener. But because his pick and roll game is so solid and he understands mostly from his defensive IQ, but just like where to go, what angle to take, who to run at, where to, like, he's just impossible to stop sometimes. Like, he can catch it under the basket, 2 on him, 1 dribble move, and he can dunk because he's taller or stronger than the guy on him. It's just frankly ridiculous. The shot isn't amazing, but he's got so many offensive tools that he's still, I think, 22 a game score right now.
Yeah, so let's start with the obvious, right? When you're 7'4", everyone wants to talk about your ability to finish at the basket. And Victor Wembanyama, in the classical sense, can be a pick and roll big man, where he sets screens at the top, rolls to the basket. You can throw alley-oops for him. Like, I know Metropolitans has run some unique actions like Spain pick and roll or some big-to-big ball screens where they get him rolling in tight spaces. Really difficult to guard because his catch radius with that 8-foot wingspan is so damn high. And if you're Tyrese Halliburton or another really good lob passing guard, you've got to be salivating at the thought of having Victor Wembanyama on the receiving end of some of those lobs. And roll gravity is something that we talk about in the scouting world, that when you set a screen and you dart directly for the basket, is the threat and the fear of you catching this ball and finishing it at the basket enough to suck in help defenders off of the corners and really collapse the lane. And I think Victor Wembanyama has unreal roll gravity just because of his catch radius, how fluid he is when he comes down with the catch. He's not somebody that forces it either. He's so long that he can catch it gather, and still go up and slam it on top of somebody just because he's that damn big. So I tend to not worry as much about setting solid contact on screens, because if he is more touch and go, if he is a guy that slips those screens, his roll gravity is going to be so great that it opens up passing avenues for the ball handler anyway. So, I know there's been a lot that's made about his screening habits, but I think that it fits and makes sense based on the other school skills and the type of player that he is.
Some of it's just that he's so eager to roll because of that gravity, right? That he knows it'll change the possession. And there's already like 3 guys 2 feet from him before he even sets the screen. So like, what are we doing? Like he does. It's almost like him standing close to setting a screen has the same effect as someone else actually setting a screen because of
Right.
what it makes the defense do. And I think the connecting piece part of that will be fascinating. Like if he does become a guy who's catching it, 8 feet from the basket, rolling towards the rim, what's his next steps? Because his passing's fine. He sees his teammates well and all that stuff. But is that going to be a weapon for him? Or is he just going to be a sweet, sick touch guy around the basket? Or is he just going to be smothered all the time? I'll be so fascinated by all that because, like, this is what I wanted to see. And I tweeted a clip of this like 20 minutes ago. It's like, if he has an ISO or if he has a post up or if he just has, like, I have the ball and there's one defender on me, like, what does he have? What are his moves? Because his handle, Adam, we might get to this, is not the cleanest. Like, it's a little loose, I would say. But he still can very easily, because his stride length is so long and because he's just taller than everybody, can so easily just create like 4 feet of space to get off a clean look in like any situation when he has that kind of setup.
Yeah, so we mentioned the pick and roll stuff at the beginning, and that's the very basic usage of somebody like Wembanyama because of his size. But this entire season has been dedicated to Wembanyama doing what I call exploring the studio space and just trying to figure out what the hell this guy can get away with his size, perimeter skill, handling ability, shooting touch, wanting him to showcase every single thing that he can to get a best feel for how his game is going to translate as a potential number 1 option on the offensive end of the floor. And he has blown me away with the diversity of skills that he brings to the table in that regard. There's several of them that might not be pristine yet, but it's important to remember this is still a teenager. This is a guy who does not fit an archetype and doesn't have someone he can sit down and watch film of in the past and say, hey, Victor, go do what this guy did. Like, no one has ever moved like him and had this just fluidity at his size. It's the phrase I keep coming back to, but we've never seen this before. So it's going to take him a little bit longer to figure this stuff out. And I tend to believe that his best move right now is the fadeaway in the mid post area. He's got decent touch. He's got really good touch on the baselines. He makes some tough ones going over either shoulder. He's got the shimmy move down and some pretty good footwork to get into that shot. But because his release is so high, it's uncontestable that you can throw the ball into him in late clock situations in that mid post area, and he's going to be really good down there. There are some flaws with his post up ability. Like, he doesn't handle contact well to his lower part of the frame. He's got to be able to spin and move around it, and he can drop step from seemingly 20 feet away and still lay it in.
Gross.
Like,
yeah.
There's no way to really compensate for that one-on-one, but he has to be able to handle physicality on the blocks one-on-one because NBA referees are going to let him play, particularly in a postseason setting. He's also not great at handling double teams. If teams send two to him, he is a little bit slower to either recognize, and because he's so big, going from dribble to pick it up and pass the ball, it just takes longer than anybody else. So double teams have had a lot of effect and impact on him in those mid-post areas, particularly if he isn't staring it down and seeing that it's going to come on every single possession. So there's definite areas that he can improve in that regard. But I think what we've seen inside the arc is really encouraging, that he can be a number 1 overall option on the offensive end, because in a late clock situation, if you can throw the ball to him and he has this 1 or 2 unguardable moves that he gets to in either side of the floor, any spot, at the end of the day, that's what matters if you're going to be a number 1 option. Can you score in the final 5 seconds of a shot clock one-on-one? He definitely can.
Yeah, I agree. The gravity is so strong that even if some of those skills we just talked about, the handle, the doubles, whatever, it takes him a minute to catch up on those, he'll still be a pretty strong impact offensive player because of what he'll do for the rest of his teammates, right? The double team stuff was interesting because you'll notice, like, opposing teams would, it doesn't matter who it was, they would send the lowest defender to be the doubler because you couldn't see that guy. So they need to figure out which one of his teammates was open. And that extra split second is where he kind of falls apart sometimes in those moments. But every other moment,
Yeah.
he's just like, oh, I can turn over my left shoulder and shoot it. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to do that.
Yeah. And I don't view that as a processing speed or a quick decision-making problem as much as hey, it takes a year and a half for the ball to go from where I dribble it up to my hand because I stand so high off the ground. Like there's just unique aspects of it. It's the same thing with his handle. Like
Right.
I hear a lot of people, people say his handle is a little bit loose, and I agree. He can go through ways to tighten it, but the ball goes so far away from his body, and it takes him, 2 strides to get from the coach's hash all the way to the basket. Like he's not going to have as much time, as much speed as a live dribble guy to make those decisions when he's attacking the basket. It's just, it takes longer to go from where his dribble is to where he picks up the ball and can make a play or a decision with it. So there are going to be turnovers. There are going to be issues that come from it, but 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, he's making the right play or right decision and almost unguardable in a one-on-one situation. So to me, I overwhelmingly believe in the positive as opposed to just some of the flaws that come with being 7'4" ball handler.
Can I read you my exact note on his handling?
Let's do it.
Handle isn't great yet, partially as a result of him being so tall.
Yep.
Like basically exactly what you just said. It's like, it looks like it's far away from him, but that's just because he's enormous. Like he's dribbling from 6 feet high sometimes when he drops the ball towards the floor. So it's going to look like that.
And you had mentioned the space creation aspect of that, right? Like he's good enough with one dribble step backs, with going between the legs into a jump shot. Spin moves are almost unguardable because of how much ground he covers, and he can lay it in off of any of those. Like the space creation for him in isolation situations is very, very real. And I don't think that you need the most polished ball handle in the world when your physical tools are going to be what allow you to get separation. As long as he's good with a certain 4, 5, 6 dribble moves that he can go to on different sides of the floor and against different types of players, going to be really fascinating to see if anybody can stop him one-on-one. And
he only needs a half step, because the other half step is just that his arms are so long and he'll pull it away from you, right? I hear a lot of misconceptions about his shooting. I think some people think his shooting is amazing because every Twitter highlight is him blocking a shot and then dribbling into a 3. I think some people think his shooting is terrible because his percentage is not good. It's below 30% actually this season in the French league. I think reality is somewhere in between those things, where his form is good, it's smooth, it's fluid. His free throw percentage is good, which is generally a very good indicator that you'll be at least a decent shooter on open shots in the NBA. And he takes the hardest threes ever half the time because they're running or in transition or something like that. So I don't think it's like a mega strength or anything, but I think he'll be a solid shooter in the NBA, which, given all the other many things we just talked about, it's like, is that the best thing to give up? Is just let Wembanyama shoot a wide open 3? Like, it might be, because he's so good at everything on offense.
Yeah, I tend to buy the shooting, particularly because I think the touch and the form, like you mentioned, are very consistent. They're very real in that regard. Not a lot of teenagers are hyper efficient 3-point shooters. Guys who particularly play in professional leagues don't tend to be 38, 39% shooters from 3. It's just really hard to do when you're that young playing against grown men. So I'm not worried by the percentages, so to speak. But I do think that the usage for him is going to be important, right? Pick and pop stuff is going to be easy for him. He's not going to spend much time spotting up in the corners. That's kind of a waste of the talent and potential that he has to impact the game in so many other areas. But above the break threes, trailer threes, dribbling in transition, just being able to spot up off the wing. There's some evidence that he can shoot on the move going to his right because his hips are so fluid. So there are a lot of positive traits that you look for when trying to evaluate his shooting that the percentage can't scare you off on its own. But I agree. I don't think he's ever going to be a 40% 3-point shooter and a lethal threat. He's just, to be honest, he has to be good enough to make those when the defense dares him to, because he's so damn good at everything else.
Can I give you, everybody listening, the perfect data point for what you just said?
Let's do it.
Luka Doncic final season with Real Madrid and Spain La Liga play, 28% from three. In EuroLeague, slightly less than 33% from three, but good free throw percentage. I don't think anyone doesn't think Luka's a good shooter in the NBA, right? Like when you're a teenager playing against older people who are fantastic, it's just not a thing. So look, the defense is amazing. The offense is really good too. Amazing. Like it's almost like reductive to talk about him sometimes because we could get into the many intricacies and we talked about some of the stuff he could get better at still, but it's just like, I told you I'd ask you this before we started, but I'm almost at the point where if whoever it is, it was a Pacers podcast, so we'll say the Pacers, but like whoever gets the number one pick, like you can't trade it for anything, like any package. It's just not, it doesn't make sense to do. It'd be stupid to do.
I agree. I think that you have to draft him and take him, and the number one pick in this draft is not available for trade no matter what somebody else offers. And there's a couple different reasons for that, right? You're talking about a 19-year-old phenom who can be the face of your franchise for probably a decade, if not more, if you handle things the right way. Team-controlled contract is a huge part of that. To be able to get somebody who can make the impact that I believe Wembanyama can early in his career at that discounted of a price just allows you to build such a successful roster from the beginning. And then hopefully that parlays into having Wembanyama want to stick around and be a part of your franchise long-term. So I see too many overall positives to what he brings to the table. I know the injury question is out there. It's something
it's coming from me in a second.
It's something that people always talk about, and I know we'll address it, but I think it's still worth it. You gotta hang on to the number one overall pick if you get it this year.
Yeah, I'd hear Luka, like Giannis. Okay, sure. Like they're ridiculous. Their contracts are long. Jokic, sure. Like they're all amazing and established, but like there's very few things that I'm like, I would even think about it just from watching him some. It's just like every indicator is like, oh my God, this guy could be like, and I hate to think this way. I'll probably think this way with Scoot a little bit too. It's just like, even if you're getting a great package in return, like the chance of just being the GM that traded Wembanyama, like no one's going to do it. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, totally agree.
So yeah, you nailed the thing that everybody wants to talk about. And sometimes I think this trope is stupid, but sometimes it does matter. These skinnier giant people, foot injuries especially, but any body part, your limbs are getting hit all the time. They bend easily because they're enormous and long. Like people are going to have injury concerns, and I think they should with Wembanyama. Now, what do you say to that? And do you think it's fair? Like, and Chet just happened, and that shouldn't count. I know you just made a face, and I agree with you. That shouldn't count because of how it happened and the situation there. That is not as a result of his frame at all. But everybody's going to go look at Chet Holmgren. I need to make a better fake voice for fans I think are stupid. But anyway, I do think there are some legitimate with these tall guys, some sort of injury concern. So what do you say to that? And do you feel like it's going to be overblown, underblown? How will it settle?
I think the concern with injury stuff is more about longevity of his career. And look, if you had asked me if I could have 10 years of the best player on the planet or 16 years of somebody that's really, really good to build a franchise around, but not quite the best player on the planet, I'm taking the decade with that one guy. It's just a basketball player mentality and a thing. You don't avoid injury. You want to play. You want to go out there and always be trying your hardest. You want to commit to guys who want to play. And Victor Wembanyama has proven throughout this season, he's had every reason to shut down playing and protect himself and his stock and just put himself in bubble wrap for the next 7 months. But he hasn't. He's played through a competitive season. He's shown what he can do. He wants to bet on himself. And guess what? He's made it through relatively injury-free and risk-free. So to me, you trust in the training program that he's put forward, the flexibility training that he's already done, that he's doing something unique and is already aware of these concerns and limitations that could come at his size and trying to offset them as much as possible. But there's two sides to every coin. If you're going to try to be the guy who avoids drafting Victor Wembanyama number one because you're worried about a history of injuries for anybody else, you don't get to say boo if you take somebody else number one and he ends up being the generational player. You just don't. So if I were a general manager, if I were in a position of authority, I'd absolutely take Victor Wembanyama. Is there risk associated? Yeah, but there's injury risk associated with every type of player. And I just believe his impact is far too great to ignore.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be like another part of these bigs with foot injuries is like sometimes they get so huge. Like this didn't happen to Shaq, but like when they get so huge, they're putting so much weight on their feet that they can hurt their feet. He's not even that huge. So like that part of it is gone. And I agree with you that I think 10 years of the best player on the planet is better than 15 years of basically anybody outside the top 5, maybe, so that seems like a no-brainer, especially with, like you mentioned at the beginning, how rookie scale deals work, how restricted free agency works. Like you're just guaranteed a minimum of 5 years of the player, most likely at least 6 or 7, even if they demand a trade at that time. Like in the NBA, that's an eon of an era with how quickly teams change now. So that's absolutely significant. And even if you miss, even if like doomsday happens and Wemby misses 2 seasons of that, great. You have 5 seasons of maybe, one of the best prospects on the planet. So yeah, I obviously get why people will say it. I still would pick him number 1, no doubt, no problem. Any other intricacies of his game you want to touch on? I think we did a little high level on both ends of the floor, but what do you feel like is also important when discussing him?
Yeah, we hit on so many different important skills for him on the offensive end and the defensive end of the floor, the versatility to be utilized in so many different ways. The one that I don't think gets discussed enough is transition ability. That rebound and run big men who can clean up the glass or block shots and then get out and push in transition with the way that they handle the basketball are really important at just getting a marginal advantage on your opponent. I think transition is that phase of the game that we don't talk about enough because it feels like what's there to analyze, right? Like you just get out in the open floor. If you have an advantage, you exploit it, you get to the basket, or you take an open 3. But the way that he creates transition by deterring shots near the basket and then being able to rebound them, to be able to push the floor as a handler and create for himself or others, to rim run and get out there on offense and just put early pressure on the rim because you have to send 2 or 3 guys to him if he's standing near the basket and there's a smaller guy around him. Like you have to send more help. It's going to create such a marginal advantage for his team in the open floor. And then you talk about the other side of things, defensive transition, like even a 2-on-1 that sees him standing near the rim, they're probably going to hesitate to take something at the basket because of his ground coverage. He can erase shots coming from behind. And we've seen several highlights this year of his effort to try to get back to the open floor and just block shots and pin him to the glass while he's retreating in transition. He creates a marginal advantage in so many different areas of the game. I think transition is the one we talk about the least and probably will talk about the least, but it's probably 20% of the NBA game throughout the course of a regular season. Those plays happen in transition. So for him to create such a big advantage there, I think it has to be brought up in the conversation around Vic.
Man, if only we were on a podcast about a team that loved transition on offense. Yeah, I think that would be a big part of his fit with the Pacers. I don't want to get into that before the lottery. Like if they don't win it, what's the point of talking about his fit with the Pacers? But short answer, just like just giving them default more stops to like let Tyrese Halliburton run with the ball. Like awesome, great fit. But him also having that gazelle-like stride and being able to be a transition threat, it's like it's hard to imagine a better fit for them at the 5 or the 4. Like he could play the 4. He can guard anybody. It's fine. So yeah, it's sublime with their identity and what he is. But that's why I wanted to do this now, because if they don't end up number 1, the French discussion immediately dies for the Pacers. But if they do get number 1, it's a no-brainer. He's that good.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And I think he and Tyrese Halliburton would be unbelievable compliments for each other. Like this is, if this happens, pencil in the Pacers for a lot of success for the next 5 to 7 years at least.
I agree. Thank you, Adam, very much for the time. This is such a fun draft class to dive into, and Wembanyama is a big part of why. But plenty of other players still to come here at Locked On Pacers. Or if you want to read about them, this is where Adam can come in and help you out. Adam, where can people read what you're saying about basketball prospects, everything?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at @theboxand1_, which has links to all of my work on there. The Substack page with all of our scouting reports that comes direct to your inbox, theboxand1.substack.com. And then all video scouting reports also come out on the YouTube channel, which is just my name, Adam Spinella. Tony, always good catching up with you. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about the French phenom.
That's right. You can also catch Adam on the Athletics NBA show with Sam Vecini every so often. I'll do that plug for you because I was listening to that very recently. But of course, a pleasure to chat with you. I'm really excited to finally. I waited till May. I put it off for a few weeks to dive into the draft stuff, but I can no longer wait. I'm excited to dive into the top whatever of this draft class and figure out what pick the Pacers have. And May 16th could decide very much of the direction of this team, given how their season went. So I'm looking forward to it. Plenty more draft stuff to come next week. Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller. I might do both next week. We'll see. Or if not, just a general, what should the Pacers do if they jump up to 2, 3, or 4, but not 1 kind of conversation? Because for them, it is interesting with the players they have. Later this week, Caitlin Cooper and I talking Andrew Nembhard, and the CBA changes have been said out by the NBA to media people. How do they impact the Pacers? Well, I'll break that all down for you every day. Thank you guys so much for listening. See you soon.